This is a fictional story. It is not based on any real person, department, or event. 3 things sit on a conference table during an internal evidentiary review, long after the rain on Route 119 has dried into a case file. The first is a printout of a cruiser terminal screen. It reads that the vehicle in question is a restricted federal fleet asset, and that supervisory or liaison verification is required before any escalation, search, or arrest, absent an active public safety emergency. The second is a transcript of dispatch audio, time-stamped. 1 line highlighted in yellow. Unit 4, the Tahoe is registered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The third is Officer Bradley Hayes's own written report, filed the next morning. No federal affiliation could be verified at the scene. Special Agent Lena Morris sets all 3 side by side and looks at the young officer across from her. When did Officer Hayes learn that vehicle belonged to the FBI? Timothy Cole doesn't look away. Before he put on the first handcuff, Hayes would later describe the stop as a misunderstanding, a fast-moving mistake made in bad weather. The timestamps say something else. Every available source corrected him in real time, and he kept going anyway. To understand how a routine stretch of highway ended up on a conference table, the story has to go back to the night it happened, 3 weeks of surveillance earlier, on a road slick with rain. Supervisory Special Agent Derek Stanton has spent 15 years with the Bureau, the last several of them in civil rights and public corruption. He is 42, and tonight he is running on fumes. 3 weeks of surveillance work has left him wanting exactly 3 things: a shower, food, and 8 hours of sleep before he has to think about any of it again. He's driving an agency Tahoe, black. New enough to still smell like the dealership, fitted with a legal plate, factory tint, a standard dash camera, and a cabin recorder, appropriate for official travel. Nothing about it is designed to trap anyone. It's simply the vehicle the motor pool assigned him for this rotation. He holds 45 in a 45-mile-per-hour zone. He hasn't drifted across the center line. His tail lights work. He just wants to get to the hotel. Behind him, Officer Bradley Hayes has been trailing the Tahoe for almost a mile, closer than the wet road really allows. Hayes is pushing 45 himself, 12 years into a career at Oak Haven PD. Most of it spent working this stretch of highway for exactly the kind of stop he's building toward now. His younger partner, Officer Timothy Cole, 6 months on the job, glances at the speedometer, then at the Tahoe's clean lane position. "He's not speeding," Cole says. "Tint looks factory. What's the violation?" Hayes doesn't answer that directly. He noses the cruiser closer, studying the plate reflectively in his headlights, then settles on the one thing he can point to on paper. Windows are darker than factory spec. That's a stop. It isn't. Not really. A tint meter reading taken later that day by an investigator will confirm the glass sits within the legal range for the state. But it's enough of a stated reason to put the lights on, and that's all Hayes needs in the moment. Derek sees them in his mirror and does exactly what 15 years of training tells him to do. He signals early. He eases fully onto the gravel shoulder. He shifts into park. He kills the engine. He turns on the dome light so the cabin is lit from the inside out, and he lowers his window before anyone reaches the truck. Both hands go to the top of the wheel, palms visible. Hayes approaches with his flashlight up, aimed almost directly into Derek's eyes. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. "Lice and registration. They're in my left breast pocket. Along with my credentials," Derek says, voice even. "I'm also legally armed. Firearms secured on my right hip. Tell me how you want me to move, and I'll move exactly that way." It's the kind of disclosure meant to remove uncertainty from the moment. Instead, Hayes' hand drops to his own weapon. "Don't move." Then, almost in the same breath, "Get out of the vehicle now." Derek doesn't argue. He narrates every motion out loud as he does it. Unbuckling my seatbelt. Opening the door, stepping out. Hayes looks him over once, taking in the suit, the government plate, the calm, and none of it softens his posture. Out here in a truck like this time of night, that's not normal, boy. Derek says nothing to that. He keeps his hands where Hayes can see them and waits. While Hayes is fixated on Derek, Cole has gone back to run the plate. What comes back on the terminal isn't ambiguous. Restricted federal vehicle. Identity restricted. Contact the Department of Justice liaison or a shift supervisor before any search, impound, or arrest unless there's an active public safety emergency. There isn't one. Cole calls it in anyway, just to be sure, and dispatch confirms it within seconds. Unit 4, the Tahoe is registered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Cole jogs back over. Sarge, dispatch just confirmed it. It's an FBI vehicle. The system's telling us to stand down and call a supervisor. Anybody can slap a federal plate on a stolen truck, Hayes says. I've seen it before. I am a supervisory special agent with the Bureau. Derek says. My credentials are in my left jacket pocket. You're welcome to verify them properly. Cole reads the terminal warning out loud, a second time, more slowly, like maybe the words will land differently if he says them again. They don't. Turn around. Face the truck. Derek keeps his hands visible and turns as instructed. Hayes kicks his feet wider than necessary and pulls his arms back hard enough that Derek feels at his shoulder. I'm complying, Derek says. I am not resisting. The cuffs close too tight, biting into his wrists immediately. What had been a roadside stop is now, by any reasonable legal standard, a full detention, and nothing in front of Hayes justifies making it one. Cole, Derek says, calm. Deliberate, note the time. Note that I'm complying. Note that dispatch already verified this vehicle before the cuffs went on. Cole writes it down. He doesn't say anything else yet. Hayes removes Derek's firearm and secures it at least in an evidence pouch, rather than tossing it loose into the cruiser. Small mercy. It doesn't change what's already happened. Then Hayes decides he isn't finished. I smell marijuana, he says, and starts toward the open driver's door of the Tahoe. I don't smell anything, Cole says quietly. It isn't a challenge. It's just true, and he says it because it's true. There is no marijuana in that vehicle, Derek says. I do not consent to a search. Hayes searches anyway. Without pausing to enter any basis for the search into the terminal first, the way department policy will later require every officer to do. He goes through the center console, the front seats, and a stack of case folders on the passenger seat, thick with tabs and case numbers. He flips them open just far enough to see they're full of surveillance logs and names before setting them down. That alone is enough to trigger a separate concern later, once investigators realize an officer with no clearance briefly had eyes on active federal case material. The folders are sealed on the spot once the scene is preserved, and a filter review later confirms Hayes never removed, copied, or acted on anything inside them. Finally, he reaches Derek's jacket, still draped over the headrest. There's nothing to find. No drugs. No weapons beyond the one already secured. No cash. No contraband. Nothing that fits the story Hayes has been building since he first saw the Tahoe's taillights in the rain. What he does find inside the jacket is a black leather credential wallet. He opens it. A gold shield. A Department of Justice identification card. Derek's photograph. A title printed clean beneath it. Supervisory Special Agent. Civil Rights and Public Corruption. Hayes stares at it for a long moment. Long enough that Cole notices the shift in his face. The exact instant it registers what kind of investigator he's just spent the last 10 minutes handcuffing on the side of the road. The badge doesn't introduce a single new fact. Everything it confirms. The plate return already said, the dispatcher already said, Cole already said, and Derek himself already said, out loud, before the cuffs ever went on. The badge just makes those facts impossible to keep pretending he hadn't heard. Word travels fast after that. The Bureau's duty supervisor is on the phone with Oak Haven PD within the hour, and the instructions are short and specific. The search stops immediately. The scene is preserved exactly as it stands. Derek's detention gets reviewed by a supervisor who had no part in the stop. Every recording, every weapon, every piece of equipment stays exactly where it is. State police are already rolling. There's no tactical convoy hidden in the tree line. No specialized unit waiting to storm the shoulder of Route 119. Just a state police supervisor, a bureau duty agent, and one additional county unit, arriving to do the unglamorous work of separating 3 people and reviewing what actually happened. Hayes, Cole, and Derek are kept apart, each giving a formal statement without hearing the others, while a supervisor walks through the plate return, the dispatch audio, and whatever footage is available. Derek is released. Someone photographs the marks the cuffs left on his wrists and asks about his shoulder. Hayes's weapon is administratively secured, not out of retaliation, but because that's the standard procedure once a use of force review opens. The Tahoe itself becomes a preserved scene, sealed the way any piece of evidence would be. Derek gives his statement plainly and completely, and then does something Hayes clearly never expected. He steps back. Because he's now the victim and a witness in his own case, he formally recuses himself from anything touching Oak Haven. He doesn't interrogate Cole. He doesn't offer anyone a deal. He doesn't demand a raid on the department. Special Agent Lena Morris, from an entirely separate chain of command, takes the investigation from here. Hayes's report, filed the next morning, tries to hold a version of events that the digital record won't support. The tint appeared illegal, he writes. The plate couldn't initially be verified. The subject made suspicious movements. The firearm created an immediate threat. The odor of marijuana justified a search. The subject resisted. Morris lines the claims up against what the equipment actually recorded. The tint is confirmed factory legal by an actual meter reading. The plate was verified and clearly logged. Well before the handcuffs went on. Derek narrated every single movement before making it, and his hands stayed visible throughout. Cole never smelled marijuana and says so on record. No marijuana was ever found. Derek never resisted anything. The file's metadata shows 2 specific phrases were added in a second draft, saved roughly 40 minutes after Hayes opened the credential wallet. Unverified federal affiliation, and suspicious movement consistent with concealment. Neither phrase appears anywhere in his handwritten notes from the roadside. Both appear only after he knew exactly who Derek was. Cole gives a full statement to Morris, and to his credit, he doesn't shade any of it in Hayes's favor. There was no speeding. The tint didn't look illegal to him either. The federal warning came back before the cuffs. Dispatch confirmed the vehicle. He told Hayes all of it, more than once, and Hayes ignored him every time. He never smelled marijuana. And he admits, without being pushed into it, that he didn't do enough to actually stop what was happening in front of him. When Oak Haven's union representative later asks him to sign a supplemental statement supporting Hayes's account, Cole refuses. With Cole's account locked in, Morris turns to the wider pattern. She pulls Hayes's stop history. Who he pulled over, what kind of vehicle they were driving, how often those stops turned into searches, how often he claimed to smell marijuana, how often anything was actually found, how much cash and property Oak Haven walked away with afterward, how often his body camera happened to be running. A pattern starts to take shape. Minority drivers in newer or higher value vehicles are searched at a rate far above anyone else Hayes stops. The marijuana odor claim appears again and again in his paperwork. Most of those searches turn up nothing. Some of them still end with drivers losing cash or property they're never formally charged over. Morris is careful here. She doesn't declare every prior stop unlawful on site. Each file gets reviewed on its own, one at a time, and only a handful hold up as independently provable civil rights violations once she's done. One file stops her cold. Calvin Brooks runs a small HVAC business out of Oak Haven. Months before Derek's stop, he was driving his company SUV home after collecting a cash payment from a job. Invoices and receipts still sitting in his glove box. Hayes pulled him over, claimed to smell marijuana, and searched the vehicle. No drugs turned up. What did turn up was roughly $18,000 in documented business funds, and Oak Haven kept it. Calvin was never convicted of anything. He didn't have the money or the time to fight a forfeiture case that can drag on for years. He filed a complaint. The department closed it without much of a look. They said his report counted as evidence. Calvin tells Morris when she finally sits down with him, "My invoices counted as excuses." He still has the paperwork, bank records, invoices, a partial video from a nearby business that caught part of the stop. Nobody wanted to look at any of it before. He asks Morris the question that ends up sitting at the center of the whole case. Why did it take an FBI agent getting stopped for anyone to finally check? That question follows Derek too, later, more than almost anything else in the file. Investigators also look upward at whether Oak Haven's leadership encouraged the pattern rather than merely tolerating it. They find a department that leaned on forfeiture money to help fund its budget, internal messages praising officers for high-value seizures, complaints against Hayes closed quickly and without real inquiry, and no real review of how often his searches came back empty. Chief Warren Hale isn't shown running some sprawling criminal conspiracy. What the record shows is an administrator who built incentives around seizure numbers and never asked hard questions when the numbers didn't match the arrests. The investigation runs for months. Independent federal prosecutors, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Price, take the case to a neutral judge for warrants, building charges from what the record actually supports rather than what would make the best headline. Hayes ultimately faces federal charges tied directly to Derek's stop: deprivation of rights under color of law, unlawful detention, filing a false official report, and obstruction connected to the sealed case files. Calvin Brooks's stop independently supports a separate federal civil rights count and a state charge for unlawful seizure. The two files strong enough on their own to stand without relying on the broader pattern. He's given legitimate defense counsel and every process he's entitled to. Price doesn't refuse to discuss a plea out of some appetite for vengeance. He simply won't offer one that doesn't match what the evidence shows. Months later, Hayes is convicted at trial on the counts tied to Derek's stop and on the separate count tied to Calvin's. The court ties the sentence directly to those convictions: the civil rights violation, the unlawful search, the false report, and the obstruction count, running partly consecutive to the seizure charge from Calvin's case, for a total of 9 years. His state certification is permanently revoked, and he is barred from ever holding a law enforcement commission in the state again. Cole cooperates fully throughout and becomes one of the strongest witnesses in the case. That cooperation matters, and it's noted formally in his file. It doesn't erase what he failed to do on the shoulder of Route 119. He receives an unpaid suspension, a formal sustained finding for failure to intervene, an extension of his probationary period, temporary loss of his solo patrol authority, and mandatory intervention training before he's allowed back on the road unsupervised. Chief Hale doesn't face criminal charges. The evidence supports administrative failure, not falsification or conspiracy on his part, and the Commission's findings reflect exactly that distinction. He's removed from his position, permanently barred from any future role overseeing complaint review or forfeiture budgeting in the state system, and the department faces civil liability tied to the pattern his leadership allowed to continue unchecked. Calvin Brooks's forfeiture case is reopened. Oak Haven can't produce a lawful basis for the seizure that would hold up under real scrutiny, and the full amount is returned to him with statutory interest, along with reimbursement for the legal costs he paid, trying to get it back on his own years earlier. His complaint file is corrected to reflect what actually happened, instead of what made the department's numbers look clean, and he's given the option to separately pursue documented business losses, tied to the years he spent without that money. Oak Haven enters a period of outside monitoring once the formal findings are issued, not before. The reforms that follow are specific. Body cameras now have to be activated before an officer even approaches a stopped vehicle, not after. Any detention that follows a restricted government plate warning triggers automatic evidence preservation, no exceptions. A partner's disagreement during a stop has to be logged in the incident file itself, not left to memory later. Search justifications have to be entered before a search begins, except in a genuine immediate safety emergency, and even then the basis has to be recorded on the spot and automatically flagged for review. A claimed odor alone no longer justifies a search on its own. It now requires some additional observable fact, a supervisor's contemporaneous review, and confirmation that the claim was made on camera before the search began, not reconstructed afterward. Forfeiture cases get independent review, and the revenue from them is separated entirely from the department's discretionary patrol budget. An outside office now handles complaint investigations. Stop and search data, broken down by demographics, gets published on a regular schedule, and officers with unusually high search or seizure rates are flagged for automatic audit. Some months later, Calvin Brooks deposits the returned funds back into his business account. The ledger finally closed with 3 words that took over a year to earn: returned, no conviction. Derek reads that closing note in the case file, alongside the state's first published demographic audit, and thinks less about the night on Route 119 than about the stops that never made it onto anyone's desk before his did. The plate warning was what finally made Oak Haven stop pretending it had been confused that night. But the investigation only mattered in the end because of what it should mean for the next driver, the one without a badge, the one whose word alone should have been enough the first time. Should a police department be allowed to keep cash or property taken from a driver who is never convicted, especially when that same department benefits financially from the seizure? And what discipline should apply to a junior officer who recognizes an unlawful detention, says so out loud, and still doesn't use the authority he has to stop it? Let us know what you think in the comments.